Hi, Katie Kimball here for the Healthy Parenting Connector, where, as always, we strive to connect you parents who really want to raise healthy kids with the experts who have the information you need. Today, I'm honored to host Jacqueline Green, founder of the International Great Parenting Simplified movement. We have a very timely topic to talk about. Thank you so much for being here, Jacqueline.
Oh, my pleasure. And I am delighted because the pandemic is just a crazy time to be parenting.
I absolutely love what we're going to title this interview, which is "Okay is the New Great." And that's you. That's Jacqueline's words. It's just about parenting in the pandemic and how are we going to come out on the other side, as whole as we can. So just a little background on Jacqueline. She did found the International Great Parenting Simplified movement. And she's been a parenting coach, educator, and a popular speaker for 20 years. Her specialty is helping stressed out professional women who have school-aged kids. But that doesn't mean, of course, that a lot of these strategies don't apply to stressed out stay-at-home moms who have all ages of kids. Since 2010, Jacqueline has also interviewed over 150 of the world's top parenting related educators and has a book coming out soon. That is so awesome. Thank you again. And why don't you tell us more of, like, that's the official bio, but tell us more of your story. Like, how did you get started with this, other than obviously having children? And how do you become so passionate about helping parents more simply?
Yeah, so the crazy thing is at the beginning of the pandemic, it hit me that, oh my goodness, suddenly women and men the world over were experiencing stress levels like I was experiencing shortly after starting to parent. And so really my personal pandemic was when I found myself with two little children in a marriage that was really devolving and really going sideways. And I finally took them and went to a women's shelter to stop the escalating physical violence.
Oh my.
And in the process of learning how to parent well through that type of challenging situation, I ended up learning how to become a great leader in many ways. And my leadership abilities dramatically increased as someone who was a professional before, but really wasn't thriving in my career the way I could have. I had organization issues. I had mood issues. I took a lot of things personally. Conflict was a nemesis for me. And so when I found myself in such a high stress situation, just like parents nowadays or moms are facing, I had to learn better skills. I had to learn how to take the stress off and how to find peace no matter what was going on around me.
Wow, isn't that exactly what everyone wants right now? I mean, and what a gift for you to be able to bring your lessons grown out of your personal crisis and teach us all how to apply them to this sort of global communal crisis that we're all
Yeah.
going through together. Gosh, thank you so much. And as you said, life has changed so much for many families since the lockdown. Not all of them. I've spoken with a number of families, and it was very interesting. I mean, some of them are just thrown for a loop. They feel like they're tumbleweeds in the wind, and it's just one thing after another. And others are like, yeah, our life hasn't changed that much, which is almost conflicting. When
Yes.
they see the rest of the world struggling. They're like, how am I even supposed to feel about that? How do I help my fellow parents? So everyone is, although in a similar situation, we have some different experiences. But how have you seen moms' needs changing, as the world shifts and shifts again, it seems, every few weeks?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I wanted to say, I love that I can give people hope. And my marriage 15 years later, we actually reconciled and we did get back together for a long time. And we did, when we ended up splitting for good 6 years ago, things got really crazy again. And it was certainly a very challenging period to get through. So I like telling people that there's actually hope for our lives to be better because of the pandemic. And that doesn't negate any pain and suffering that's happened to date, but it means that pain and suffering can be transformed and can be actually a tool and impetus for us to grow and change. So one of the biggest things, in answer to your question about how I see our needs have changed, is many of us were getting by before by being self-sacrificing and putting our needs last. And one of the things I've seen has shifted is many of the families who had more balance going into the pandemic are the families who are doing better. Families who are, but even of them, there's lots of parents who already felt like they were doing pretty well. And then suddenly the pandemic hit and they're redlined. So they might now, be still keeping a lid on things, but they're just dancing and pedaling like ducks, frantically underwater. And parents who really, mums who were not good at prioritizing our needs, our leadership skills, our needs. We wouldn't lead in any other part of our life without having some training and without focusing and without recognizing, like, we don't want our pilot to be exhausted and not have slept, because we might be going down if that happens. And when you get a severe health crisis like the pandemic has caused for many, then suddenly our ability to maintain our energy and maintain our vision and maintain a sense of calm, and I've got this, so that our kids are that much calmer. I know that your focus, is healthy eating, which is so important. And we need our kids to be in the right environment psychologically to digest those wonderful nutrients. Anxious kids, anxious moms don't actually digest the nutrients. Right. So our need to look after ourselves, so we can be taking that breath and being calm and not just trying to pretend we're calm, but really feeling it. It's counterintuitive, because right now it can feel like the last thing we can do is have time for ourselves and time for our growth, but it's what our children need. And again, going back to that pilot analogy, you don't want a frantic pilot who's reading the book as he flies or she flies, who has no support if they're not sure that dial looks a little funny. You want them to be taking the time to check in and check with their support people. So going it alone is not going to serve anyone's families or anyone during the pandemic.
So you recently shared 3 tips to help families soar post-pandemic, and talking about, like, how can we have more at least okay days? And I love these tips. I think they're very actionable. So walk us through each of these.
Sure. Well, so humans, one of the many things that I found that was fascinating is about a decade into my journey, I came across a health psychologist's work, Kelly McGonigal, and she talks a lot about how there is an upside of stress. It's one of her books, right? We are actually meant to thrive under stress. Now, there's a few things that make the difference between whether we thrive or don't, but one of them is our own expectations of ourselves. Because if we go into this any type of crisis and we keep our expectations really high, we're liable to find ourselves that much more debilitated, depressed, procrastinating. Lots of times we procrastinate because what we're wanting is not achievable. If our expectations are too high, of course we're going to procrastinate, because it doesn't, like, what's the point? We're
going to fail anyway.
Exactly. So we might as well conserve our energy than go into a failing project. So I started talking about okay being the new great, because realistically what I saw is those mums who were doing well going into the pandemic, many of them feel like they're just doing okay now because things are so much more stressful. Well, readjust your sights, because realistically, if you're doing okay during this type of extreme uncertainty, you're actually doing great, and you're modeling something for your kids. You're modeling for your kids that sometimes life's about okay. Sometimes life's about going with the flow, and there's lots of things we don't like right now, and so okay is the new great. So the first thing is shifting our expectations, and I keep going like this to indicate lowering them, because ultra performers, you can be a high performer and still have unrealistic expectations for yourself. You'll have probably mental health issues, like at least elevated levels of stress and that, but you can do it. But if you want to be an ultra performer, you have to be really good at aiming for B's, actually aiming a bit lower, so that you find yourself consistently meeting and exceeding your targets. And then it's very motivating. And for our kids, it's phenomenal when we can teach our kids to start aiming for Bs. And I could get into some fun side conversations, because realistically, if you're getting A's all the time, you're probably not on your learning edge anyways. So if you want a child who's an optimal learner, they should be getting some B's, because that shows that they're being more challenged.
Ooh.
And yeah.
That's like my brain is lighting up right now, Jacqueline. I'm just thinking, because I was an all A. I have an all A child. I have some not A children, and they're not okay with it. And I'm just, what a shift in the conversation. I'm also thinking about my own to-do lists. It's never done.
Yeah.
I'm always frustrated about it.
Yeah.
Why am I not aiming lower? It's like training yourself that you can achieve the goal, right?
Yes.
Because if we train ourselves, we never achieve our goals, and we keep setting them higher. That's just foolish. It's building up for failure.
And many of us came into parenthood, the technique of aiming really high, even though we might have been causing ourselves a lot of pressure, we were succeeding more often. But then suddenly you get all the increased demands of the household, the kids, and the myriad of things that go with them. Suddenly we're not as successful. And suddenly the debilitating aspect of aiming too high comes in. So okay is the new great, aim for Bs, and shift your expectations, at least during the pandemic. Guaranteed, if you want kids who have grit, who are self-motivated, that shift will help them. The second thing that I'm talking a lot about is the need for support, and to get stellar at support. Because realistically, again, that pilot, you don't want the pilot to be the one who's checking the tires and also who's doing the routine maintenance and doing the flight announcements and all that. You want that pilot of the plane to be confident and well supported. Right? And that support does mean also mental support, that if they're stressed out, that the pilot, she's getting support from someone. She's getting a senior mentor perhaps, as well as her peers who she can talk to about, hey, I'm really noticing that when I land at this airport, certain things are happening, and she can find out how to adjust and what other people are experiencing. So stellar support's a second thing. During the pandemic, that can look like virtual support. And it is crazy, the virtual support we can have. One is we can have the support of emotional connections, which we desperately need. And many of us were too isolated pre-pandemic too. So it's an opportunity to start being real about the fact that, parenting's not always easy, and I really am struggling sometimes. We want our kids to come to us for help, but if we're modeling that part of being a good parent is never needing help, what does that do? Right? Does that show our kids, so our kids are internalizing? But if they see, oh, mom has all these people involved who might be involved in a tiny, tiny way, but they are people that she's able to reach out to, that shows them it's okay. And if they see you actually reaching out and saying, wow, like I can't do it this Saturday, I've got too much going on, I really could use, mom, could you watch the kids via Zoom and read them a story for a half an hour? You're actually building your kids' village, and you're giving them the sense that other people care enough about them to care for them. And at the same time, you're showing that it's okay. It's okay to ask for support. And it's okay to say, mom, I'm really having a tough day, or whoever it is you're talking to. So that's the second tip. And the third one, and I'm thinking for a second about which one I said in this case, because sometimes I swap out one, but is celebrating our wins. And again, if you think of what motivates us and motivates our kids, if you get really good at celebrating even the tiniest of wins, it's a momentum builder, and it gets you from, instead of thinking of that to-do list, all the things you didn't do, if you can focus on what were a couple things that you got done that day that you're really pleased about. And if you're having a tough day, it might be that you got out of bed and you still fed the kids. And it might be, and maybe you let them, if they're virtual schooling or if you're homeschooling, maybe you gave them a day to create and be more creative and more self-directed. But finding the win in how your day went.
That's great. And I think, too many moms, we don't count our daily activities, right? When
Yes.
I look at my to-do list, feed breakfast, prep, plan snacks, grocery shop, feed lunch, feed dinner, put
Yeah.
away food, all those things they're not on the list,
Yeah.
but they ought to be celebrated to help us remember that we are doing lots of things that aren't always on the list or that might not feel productive because they're just, oh, it's survival. It's what we have to do. But, it's also what we get to do to help our family thrive. That's fantastic. Really, really important. I think it's so important as parents to just shift our mindsets.
Well, if I can jump in, because yes, shifting our mindset is paramount, and we often know the importance of our children having a growth mindset. What we can do is model it, and we'll find our kids, like I taught my kids phrases like next time, sweetheart, could you? And it was so fun when I started hearing that back from my kids, right? Next time, mom. Well, that's a growth mindset. That's showing belief that in the future something can change. The thing I wanted to add too is, speaking of being stellar at support, a lot of times we're not good at getting support from our co-parenting partner. And one of the reasons I thought of that is because men, and not everyone's identifying by gender, but if you have a masculine being in your life, chances are he is better at celebrating wins and taking credit for wins, right? Taking credit for their sports teams winning. It's actually a characteristic that we could use to work on. And being stellar at support with our partner can look like reducing, again, lowering those expectations. If you can allow your guy to do a B job or even sometimes a C job, but allow him to take some ownership of it, you can make a phenomenal difference on how invested he is and how likely he is to want to pitch in. A lot of times men react very poorly to us having really high standards. And also, it's not even just high standards, it's our standards, not allowing them to have their way of doing things. And it can be goofy how they do things, but if you let them do it and let them be responsible for however it turns out, which might mean the kids are cold, and we could get into a fun discussion that there's actually some pros of kids being cold because our guy forgets a jacket or something. And our men are actually meant to challenge our kids in a different way. So if we can let them do it their way and back off, it can give us a little time for our leadership, for our self-support, and also can help us really, again, model for our kids. It's okay for our kids don't have to turn out just like us, right? Like your children who aren't the A students, that you're modeling when you show it's okay for dad to do things different, that it's okay for them to show up in the world the way they are.
I love that. I guarantee a lot of women were nodding their heads, and I'm sure that many of our listeners have had the experience of an attempted delegation, a failed attempt at delegation, right? Hand over a job, criticize the performance, the spouse, partner, whoever, the child says, fine, you do it next time. That's not sustainable, right? That's not how it works. So I just love that. Yeah, let them get B's. And we talk all the time about letting our kids fail. Yes. And letting them learn from failure. And so, I think a lot of that advice also applies to sharing responsibility with our children, because that's a win for everyone. That's part of my stellar support system,
I love that when you've talked about having kids help out in the kitchen, and that's, again, keep the expectations low and let those kids help out, dig in, and it is really important. Those life skills are so important.
Oh, absolutely. We've heard from a lot of our families in our community that they're focusing specifically in this time more on life skills, especially back at the beginning when we all found ourselves at home with nothing on the calendar. Some of the really wise ones were like, oh, maybe my kids can learn to clean a toilet, check the air in the tires, these things that we just didn't have time to do, learn to set up voicemail, pay a bill, like all sorts of stuff. We could slow down a little bit. And I do see that as a massive silver lining, this new shift to life skills and particularly cooking, of course. Have you seen parents in your community sort of change their focus, and are they, starting to work with kids maybe in the kitchen more?
Yeah, absolutely. And seeing gifts of their children having, because of not ferrying them around as often, even though some, most kids are doing whatever they were doing before to some degree now, whether it's virtual or not. Like, so it's not just a free calendar now for most people, but there are a decreased number of activities, and it does give some openings for allowing kids to be more involved. It also literally, we create such a rich culture for our children when we cook together. When we spend that time transferring, it's transferring knowledge, but it's also, so one of the most important things we can do for our children is take care of their need to be deeply connected with us. And food is an extremely powerful way of doing that. And recipes that are ones that we did with our parents when we were younger, those become like a lifelong, well, I was thinking they're almost like a talisman, that they're a touch point, and to this day, my sister messaged me recently and said, did I have grandma's brownie recipe? And I was making a chocolate cake, a 3-bowl chocolate cake, just a simple recipe, but I made a recipe that I had made when the kids were little, and it brings everyone together. It's part of what it is to be ex-family, is those traditions, those routines. And traditions don't have to be big fancy things. It can be a 3-bowl chocolate cake that involves no beater, no, you're just a little stir hand, really low tech is what I'm saying, and no icing even most of the time, really basic, but that's something my family understands and has memories tied up with, right? So yeah, it's a huge opportunity, and I'm seeing a lot of people reevaluating and saying, wait a minute, maybe those cooking times together, those life skills that our children are learning, and the fact that they're learning them from me and not from Google as a young adult or a young mother, 20 years from now or something like that, it's significant and it really matters. And our children will be that much more self-directed, that much more motivated in their school if we're taking a bit more of a back seat too and letting them drive more.
I love that. I know Kids Cook Real Food, our 3 C's are connection, confidence, and creativity. And so that connection, I love that image of just having that touch point. When whenever I meet people and I say, yeah, I have an online class, I teach kids to cook. Usually within 2 minutes, one of 2 things happen. They either pull out their phone and show me a picture of something their kids have made in the past month.
Yeah,
which
nice.
Is interesting. Like, that's the kids' confidence that the parents feel that it's actually worthy of taking a picture and sharing it with others. Or they tell me a story about cooking with their mother or their grandmother.
Yeah,
And feeling that connection with their history almost invariably. So I do think that this is building our future memories. It's building our future foundations of confidence and sense of self and sense of family, and really what ultimately we are talking about parents in the pandemic saying, okay, is the new great. And in a way, we can only do that if we're standing on something solid.
Yeah.
Right. So thank you for our mothers and our grandmothers having already, hopefully for most of us, given us at least their best okay, right, in their moments.
Well, and maybe I want to share too, like my parents, they were dual careers, 6 university degrees between them, 3 and 3, right? So they bought a full-time farm in a city, close to a city where they didn't know anyone. So really, in many ways, I feel like my mom was parenting through her personal pandemic, was being way overwhelmed and way too much. So in many ways, we had huge challenges as kids because of ways that my parents were just too busy to attend to us. And yet, even cooking wise, she made Swedish pancakes. So I was born in Minnesota, and there's a lot of Swedish people in that area, and that's where the recipe came from. Anyways, she would make Swedish pancakes, and I don't even know how often she did it, but that was, on these brownies, that there were a couple, which she didn't make them. My sister and I made them, but we got the recipe, and we did do Swedish pancakes, and those things were some grounders for us. And as an adult, I've been able to get to a place of really reconciling. She totally did the best she could, but didn't have support. and she kept those high expectations, and she did not know how to celebrate little wins,
Oh,
right?
wow.
She had huge, she was a high achiever, and she was
Mm.
trying to stay the high achiever with her parenting, and she needed to really lower a lot of standards. And so I want to keep that message out there, because I do see so many parents nowadays are working really hard also to get all the external things going, and realistically a smaller house but time to cook, that can make all the difference in the world. And if women also with things like nutrition, like focus on the basics and don't get too complicated, especially like get complicated if it's working and get more finessed, but otherwise start smaller and celebrate your wins instead of being mad at yourself that you know that you could do an even better job. Well, you could, but you also could do a way worse job too. And we're not looking at that as often as we could. Right?
I love that in some way you can look at, you know, the gaps in your own mother's experience, and now you're saying, oh, like, how can I teach an entire generation of moms to do this better? You know, and we learn from each other's failures. My kids will learn from my failures, and it's just about acknowledging them and being humble, being open with those things. You know, sometimes the win is, man, I really messed up, but I want to apologize to my kids.
Totally.
Right? Sometimes that's the win.
Yes, exactly. It's a huge win. And watch that as moms, that our tendency to be self-sacrificing can actually lead us down the wrong road. And so if we're finding that we're losing it with our kids a lot, take that as a sign that you need probably support. You may well need some tools to, we do something we call a pause button challenge to help you in the moment, but not just in the moment. You also need to find a way outside of the moment to reduce your stress. Because if you're really high stressed and your expectations are high and you're kind of, you know, at that place all the time, you're going to be losing it at your kids. And they will be better off for you slowing down a bit and getting support for yourself, even if that means that you have to back off on some things in the short term.
Yeah. And we all need these reminders. We really do. I mentioned before we got on the call that a lot of our moms might not be. We have a lot of professional moms, but we also have a lot of homeschooling moms, part-time stay-at-home moms. Do you think these strategies need to change at all for different lifestyles, or were we just all in this pandemic thing together?
So I want to say something about, I homeschooled for a few years, and I certainly worked very part-time when I started working from home and that. So a lot of professional women are choosing to homeschool or stay at home. So that's still my audience for sure. I do think that many of the techniques are, well, similar for sure, like in terms of the importance of lowering your expectations and those different things. And if you are homeschooling and or a stay-at-home mom, realistically, you've actually given yourself the gift of time to some degree. And I say that to some degree, like as a homeschooling mom, you've got lots going on for sure, but you've given yourself the gift of lots of time with your kids. So keep in mind, parenting's a long game. So, you know, even things like, and I know I sweated about cursive, for example. Well, realistically, and so my kids never did learn cursive. That wasn't something when I was homeschooling I was able to get them doing properly. And realistically, most kids nowadays don't know cursive.
Right.
So would it have been great for my kids to learn cursive? For sure. And had I not looked after my stress levels, I could have had kids with perfect cursive whose mental health was suffering because they felt this pressure all the time. And kids nowadays feel extreme pressure.
Yes, they do.
Right? It's a huge deal. So I am never blaming any mom in any way, shape, or form. I feel like I was so blessed to get on this crazy route that looked like a horrible route, because my ex-husband was not someone I couldn't just get him on board with me. I had to figure out workarounds. And I had to tone down a lot of even my nutritional. I had very high standards. I used to make these loaves of they were like bricks, because I was trying to do 100% whole wheat and this and that and other thing. And I finally actually gave up on bread making after doing this for a while. And it was about the time when I plunged into clinical depression. But it was a gift for me that I had to learn to lower my standards, because my mental health and me being calmer helped my kids, knock on wood. I have 2 young adults who, despite the pandemic, suicide has been a common problem in young adults, and my kids are doing well. And that doesn't mean they're perfect by any means. And the aim for B's, I see that with my kids. Like, aiming for B's means having kids who are out there in the world able to follow their dreams, whatever those dreams are. And yeah, there's so many things I could say about that, but I really wanted to emphasize that if you're home with your kids, whether you're homeschooling or not homeschooling, these tips are really accurate for you, because if you're working full time, you're just going to have that much harder time finding the time to do any self-care. And there's a difference between rejuvenating self-care or just kind of passive self-care. I really encourage you to find ways to rejuvenate. And that can include, learning. It really, but also learning, if I can say one last thing about something I'm seeing that I'm hoping is going to be a real shift right now, is parents realizing that just endlessly consuming parenting information, it's actually making parents feel more overwhelmed.
Oh, okay.
So less content and more applying the content that you do know, right? And so that's our focus, is on simplifying, we have 5 steps to great parenting simplified, so that you're not listening to yet another, all these things are interesting, but they can make you feel like, oh, but I should be doing this, I should be doing that. And then you're kind of pulled all over the place, and you're really giving a frantic energy to things when you're constantly feeling like, oh, I should be doing this, I should be doing that.
Yes. Oh yeah. The shoulda, woulda, coulda hamster wheel is awful. And we're trying to do everything, and we do everything poorly.
Yeah.
And nothing well, nothing to completion. So I love that. Great Parenting Simplified. We will definitely make sure people can connect with you wherever we share this video. There will be links above, below, to the side somewhere. And I mean, I love how you're talking along and you're like, oh, there's so much more I could say. I can just hear like, oh, there's an hour-long talk on shooting for bees, and there's probably an hour-long, discussion on this. And so I really want to encourage people to look you up and find you and simplify, their parenting with this awesome information. And I really appreciate you coming on, particularly about this topic in this time, and sort of helping us to simplify our expectations, simplify, the small wins, and simplify the idea of just making sure that we are taking care of ourselves and being the pilot who is well rested, and seeing ourselves as leaders. That's a win in and of itself, just to be like, I'm a mother, I'm a leader in this household, and I have an important role to play. All wonderful thoughts and mindsets. Now I'm super practical, and I love to leave parents with just one message that they can hold on to, walk away and go, okay, this is the thing. What would you encourage parents to think about in one way and remember?
I think I'd like to end with the idea of celebrate your wins. Make sure you write down every day. It's not quite the gratitude challenge. It's write down 5 wins every single day. And if you're finding yourself feeling defeated and really struggling or stressed out, you could do that in the middle of the day too. Just stop for a minute and find 5 wins. And the win might look like, I didn't scream at my kid, or I screamed at my kid and I apologized, or I screamed at my kid and then I remembered, oh, flip, there's better ways to do this, and made a commitment for next time. Like, a win doesn't have to look like it looked good. And I actually think we need to normalize the fact that conflict is going to happen, especially right now. So keep looking at 5 wins at least. And if you get on a roll and you want to keep writing, go for it, because that's how you're going to get momentum in the direction you want to go.
That's beautiful, simple, right? Grab a piece of scrap paper. It doesn't have to be complicated. Yeah. And you can infuse some connection into that too by texting a friend your 5 wins, or getting on a call with a friend every day or every other day and say, we're only allowed to talk about our wins. No complaining. Wouldn't that be amazing?
And with your kids, you could get that was easy, the Staples button. Like, get a button like that and start hitting it. when you've done something even little, and it could be in the kitchen, you know, with the kids, they measured a cup of flour, hit the button, because it's just energizing.
That's fabulous. We actually have one of those little bells that you would hit, like if you
Yeah.
go into a store and no one's there, ding. We have one of those from my teaching days. And when my husband became an entrepreneur and first started selling things a few years ago, every time a sale would come in, he would hit it because they were so few and far between. And he's stopped doing that now. But that's
Yeah.
like, that's what we were doing. And it did give momentum and it felt good. And it's just silly. But
Yeah.
sometimes, you know, silly is the new serious in some ways. And okay
Yes.
is the
Yes.
new great, and simplification is the new overachievement. So important. Thank
I
you
love
so
how
much,
you said
Jacqueline.
that. Yeah, that's beautiful. And yes, and silly, like I was so serious before. Life was so serious and I wasn't getting anywhere. I was going down the wrong path, right? So yeah, I wouldn't say though ever force yourself to lighten up. Get support. If you're serious, there's a reason you're serious. And you didn't mean to get here, and you can get to an amazing place too.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so very much, Jacqueline. And for all of you out there, I'm Katie Kimball for the Healthy Parenting Connector. I will be back again next week with another expert helping you raise these healthy, amazing, resilient, full of grit children in a
Mm.
pandemic or not.